So I'm going to show you a quick tip using Native Instruments Massive, using the step LFO. When you load up the default patch, the step LFO is on LFO number 8, but any of the 4 LFOs can be set to either performers or steppers using this drop-down menu. This is a step sequencer with values between 0 and 12. You'll notice we've got a rate control here, which can also be tempo synced, and we can also reduce the number of steps by clicking and dragging to the left, and we can change the start position using this little yellow arrow, which is particularly useful when the restart is enabled. You can do some quite sort of standard sounds. Here I could map it to a low pass filter. Notice the modulation is unipolar rather than bipolar like traditional LFOs. Now when I press a key, you can see the steps correlate to the filter's position. This is a pretty boring effect just like that, so what I've been really into doing is using it as a pitch sequencer. So I'm going to load a reset patch. As you can just hear, we've got a sawtooth there coming from oscillator 1. Now the way I found this to be particularly effective is to sync the stepper LFO to our host tempo, and for the ratio to be 1/16, which means that each step will correlate to a 16th note division. Now whilst there is a randomize button and that can sometimes produce interesting results, I'm actually going to program in each step manually. What you might notice as well is that if we just drag the steps in as is, let's obviously click and drag that and modulate our oscillator. Because we have a range of 0 to 12, it makes sense to go for 1 octave worth of pitch modulation, so drag the amount of pitch modulation to +12. You will notice that this is out of tune. So what you want to do is enable this snap to grid, and what that will do now is make each step a whole integer. Still, there's a little further problem. What I've found is a good way to achieve the most effective results is to stick to a basic scale, something like a pentatonic scale if you want something really idiot-proof. I'm just going to stick to a minor pentatonic. Now what you have to realize here is that each value is an interval corresponding to the root note. So if we were to imagine we're in C minor, C is 0 and it's also going to be +12, D would be 2, E flat would be 3, F would be 5, etc. So we could run up and down a scale just like this if we like. So obviously we're a step short of making it perfect, but okay, so that's, again, it can be pretty boring just doing that, but what I think is really cool is actually having several oscillators all tuned to different stepper LFOs performing some sort of rudimentary counterpoint. Just to exemplify that, I've made this quick example here. I'll just talk through the patch quickly before we listen to it. We've got all 3 oscillators being used, tuned to just tuned to normal concert pitch. They're all sawtooths, and they have a different stepper LFO modulating the pitch. So oscillator 1 is modulated by stepper LFO 8, oscillator 2 is modulated by 7, and oscillator 3 is modulated by 6. Now I did spend a little bit of time going through each of these, making sure that all the chords work, so this isn't just like something that I've stumbled across by accident. And whilst it's not necessarily the most interesting sound, it does go some way to demonstrate how powerful this tool is. So a little bit buzzy, but what you can hear there is we can cycle through a maximum of 16 chords. What I've basically made here is just a 3-part harmony. So stepper 6 is playing the low notes. So we've got C, C, probably have that on snap to grid. C, C, D, E flat, F, blah 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 blah. The stepper LFO 7 is playing the harmony above that, so that's normally in thirds, and then the stepper LFO 8 will be playing the harmony above that, which would be something like a 5th above 6, although it's not always exactly just as simple as thirds and fifths. But so yeah, that's really cool, and if you spend a little bit of time planning out your chord sequence in advance, you can get some really interesting sounds. It gets even more interesting if you were to change the ratio in which these various steppers are triggering at, and even maybe disabling the restart function. Final example is the stepper LFO, in this case being used to modulate the pitch of oscillator 2, and I'm using the performer LFO to do some sort of interesting stuff. Let's just start off with, so this is controlling both the amplitude and pitch modulation of a sine wave for oscillator 1, making a sort of pseudo kick sound. If you wanted to push this further, you could use some sort of sine triangle, and you could do some sort of, I don't know, wavetable as well if you wanted. We've also got our noise oscillator being controlled by another performer LFO, and what I found really interesting about this is not only do we have exponential, logarithmic, and sometimes linear curves which you can load here, but when you use something going from low to high, it simulates almost a reverse type sound. And this curve here, which I don't know what the name of is, but I just think of it as like an offset, is almost like an open hi-hat. So when you put that with our kick, and then I've just got a simple sawtooth. So in conclusion, while Massive is known for doing its big sort of disgusting complex dubstep basses and things like that, I think it's actually a really interesting tool for just for inspiring compositional ideas and doing some really sort of interesting Tangerine Dream type arps and things like that. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed that. I'll leave a link in the description to a slightly more in-depth explanation of this.